So in this video, I want to talk about the question of, should I get a diagnosis? In the last video, we talked about the pros and cons of having a diagnosis. In this video, I want to talk about, should I get a diagnosis? So, like I said, what worked for our family is that we did get an official diagnosis for our 2 children that have autism. When you're sitting down and you're thinking about, should I get a diagnosis or not? One of the things that I would encourage you to consider is the long term. And this is kind of the process and the things that we thought about while we were considering getting a diagnosis or not. So again, I hope it's just information that you find helpful. Mostly I'm just relating the information that we thought about in our process of getting a diagnosis that we went through with our 2 children. One of the things that we sat down and we thought about was the long term. Not just the now and the immediate while they're 2 or 3, but what's going to be best for them when they're 16, when they're 18, when they're 35, when they're 62. You know, autism is generally not a condition that limits the life of a person. It's not a medical condition that can cause people to have shorter lifespans. While there are perils that happen with children with autism, for example, with wandering and things like that, but generally it's not something that limits the life expectancy of the individual with the diagnosis. So you have to sit down and say, what's going to be the best for my child when they're going to be 35, not just when they're 3. So that's something you have to sit down and consider. So you have to consider the long term for your child in their happiness, their well-being, and their ability to be independent adults when they get older. You have to think about their ability to live successfully and independently throughout the rest of their life and what they're going to need in order to be successful and accomplish that. You have to think about the commitment involved in getting your child enrolled in therapy or involved in different therapies. There is a time commitment with that, and it does take a lot of scheduling and modification of activities in your family's life. Currently, our boys are doing 15 hours a week of ABA therapy, and there's a lot of scheduling that has to go into that. It is a commitment that our families made when they were younger, since they're 7 and 8 now. When they were younger, we had them involved in a research preschool program that was specifically for children with autism, and we had to make that commitment for a year round, get them to school by 8 o'clock and pick them up right at noon for 2 years. Actually, we ended up doing it for 3 because they had that one overlap year. So we didn't have to do it for 4. We only had to do it for 3. But it was a year-round thing. So it didn't matter, if it was summer vacation or Christmas break or any of those things. We had to have them there when the school was open, and they had to be there all the time. And we had to be very prompt and consistent because that was one of the commitments we made when they got enrolled in the school. So there is something you need to consider in deciding what's best for your family is, what are you willing and able to commit to? Other things when considering should I get a diagnosis or not is you need to look at the individual. We have 2 children with autism, and they are very different and they have very different needs. But at the same time, there's a lot that feels like is the same with them. But the needs of our 7-year-old are not the same as the needs of our 8-year-old. Our 8-year-old was nonverbal up until he was 5. Obviously, his need for therapy and for assistance was much greater than our child who had a speech delay, but he was coming along. So you have to stop and look at the individual. If you've got a child that's labeled, would be considered what the old term of Asperger's was, just kind of a little socially impaired, but not necessarily dysfunctional with a lot of other things, or if you've got a child who's nonverbal, is 7 or 8 years old, is still working on potty training, those are definitely 2 very different situations, and having a diagnosis would have different results for either one. You have to look at how much support that child is going to need eventually. Like I said, our oldest son needed a lot more support than our 7-year-old did. It's just the way that the dice rolled on the autism spectrum for them. You have to sit down and look at what you have to offer as far as finances go, or your time, or your effort, or your ability to deal with some of these things. Unfortunately, we all don't get to choose whether or not we want to deal with our child having autism. It's done. Ta-da! That's why you're reading this, or that's why you're watching this vlog as it is you've got a child who you're worried about has these things. You're already having to deal with it. But you just have to decide what you can commit to for whatever length of time it's going to take. There are financial issues that need to be taken into consideration when paying for therapy and different things like that. So I'm not going to discredit that at all. Pretty much all of us have to take finances into consideration unless all of a sudden we suddenly become billionaires. But, odds are that's not going to happen. At least not for us. I don't know about you guys. You never know who's going to get lucky. I don't play the lotto though, so ultimately what you really need to sit down and think about when you're considering getting a diagnosis or not, if should I do it, is you have to think about what's best for your family. You have to think about what's best for the child and what you want to see happen in the long term. Those are the main things that I'd sit down and seriously consider, because your child with autism is a member of your family. So you have to keep your family intact. You have to do what's best for your family. And then you need to consider what's best for that child. Most of the time, depending on behaviors, whatever helps that child is going to end up being best for the family. But again, that's not always the case. You have to just consider what's going to end up being best for your family, what's going to be best for the individual, and what's going to be the best outcome for the long term. So those are the things that we had to sit down and think about when we were talking about what we wanted to do with our kids. And as I've mentioned throughout the video, we obviously went in the direction of get the official diagnosis, and we've been involved in therapy, and it's been a real commitment on our family, and it's been basically what we've been doing for the last 5 years. Most of our family and relatives, things like that, they want to ask, why aren't you traveling? Why haven't you come to visit us? Why haven't you been doing this? Or they want us to come on vacations. And we're like, well, they can't miss school when we were doing our preschool program. Or we need to be back in time to get them to therapy. This has been a real commitment. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand. But we feel like that's what's been worked out best for our family. Again, that's the direction that we took. That's what worked best for us. But you just have to sit down and figure out what's going to work out best for you and your family, and have to think about the long term. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. So if any of you have questions or comments, concerns, helpful advice, encouraging words to other people who are going through the same process, please feel free to comment down in the comment section to help anybody that is out there that needs help, and that it's a tough decision because it means a lot for your life. So I hope you guys are having a great day, great evening. You can always hope. And that's right, we can always hope. There is always hope. So don't forget that. We'll catch you again later on the next video.